Good afternoon. My name is Maria Del Rosso. I'm the director of the Fauquier Public Library. And we're very pleased today to welcome Dr. Major Warner, our superintendent of schools, and Lou Emerson, a veteran journalist and editor here from the county. This is the second in our series called Sundays at 2, where we like to bring prominent people in for conversations. And so we've asked Lou and Dr. Warner to sit today with us and have a conversation. So without further ado, I turn it over to Lou and
Great.
Dr. Warner.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'll warn you, as I did last time, that the acoustics in this room are a little bit challenging, so try to be quiet when it's appropriate to be quiet. Thank you, Major, for agreeing to do this. When we launched Fauquier Now 12 years ago, after being out of the community and the news business for a while, I was trying to figure out what or whom to write about. And I immediately thought of Major, knowing that he was or is a Fauquier product who had risen to become principal of Kettle Run High School. So he graciously allowed me to spend a day with him. And I learned a lot, had a good time, and so he's going to do it again.
Absolutely.
Not a day. Okay.
I've been called a lot of things, but prominent is not one I've done. But I'll accept it.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about you, and we're going to talk about education, and we're going to talk about this community. I want to start with a little quiz because I've never had the opportunity to give an educator a quiz. Okay? Harold Lamb, Tony Lease, Dallas Johnson, J. David Martin, Jonathan Lewis, David Jeck. What do you have in common with those folks, and what separates you from those folks?
That's the quiz question you're going to start?
You can give me a short answer.
Well, I think all of us have a dose of insanity, for starters.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have, I think, clearly you got to have something inside you that's different than everyone else. I think you want to take on this challenge, but I think what we all have in common is a willingness to serve.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's at the core of every superintendent principal's decision is how do I serve this community? So I think that's probably the answer.
So what distinguishes you? Am I on or not on?
You are.
Okay.
How's that? Is that good? Okay. I won't go back over the insanity offer answer anymore.
It helps if you face us when you're speaking.
Okay. I'll
Thank
look
you.
this way. All right. If you all give me reassuring looks, I'll continue to look this way.
Teachable moment.
Absolutely.
So what separates you from those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gentlemen?
I think for me, and I know 3 of them fairly well, I would tell you I have a fearlessness for me that I think, and they may disagree with this, and that's okay. I think I have a fearlessness that would separate me from that. I have a passion for kids, in particular, kids that I would call underdogs, that I think separates me from them, although I think if they were sitting here, they would say the same thing. You can't do the job if you're not willing to get at the toughest of the tough. That's what pulls you to it. And so I think that's what would separate me. Outside of the fact that I think I'm considerably younger than all of them. So that would be right.
You gave a very smart and complex answer. You're the only Fauquier native
Yes.
to serve as superintendent in modern times. I've gone back as far as my feeble research could go, and I've yet to find someone who has risen from Fauquier County Public Education to become superintendent of the school system. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, about growing up here. So tell us a little bit about what you know about your ancestors and how long they've been here and how they got here.
Well, I know my oldest sister's done quite a bit of genealogy. I know my grandfather's father followed the cattle from Texas Joe Pennick was my grandfather, and Jackie, I know you know my family well. So that's probably a part of side of my family that I probably know the least about. You hear stories. My grandfather was a wonderful man, but his grandfather, again, followed the cattle out of Texas, and that's kind of where the job. So he came out on the train. I had an interesting experience at one of my great uncle's funerals a few years ago. Out Delaplane Grade Road, some of my family's buried out there, and I just happened to be standing and graveside, and I look down, and I'm literally, not on purpose, but I'm standing on my great grandparents' headstone, and it's the first time I had ever seen it. And I think 1884, 1886 were the years that were both my great grandparents' birth years, and so that was an interesting moment for me. I share a lot with folks who will listen, in particular when I was at Kettle Run, because I always felt like it was a community that I brought a story that might be a little bit different than what you see demographically. And so folks were always asking me about, what is your journey? What is your story? And so as far back, my great-grandparents obviously were born into slavery. Most of my dad's family is from Upperville, St. Louis, on my grandmother's side, if you all are familiar with that. And they were Haleys and Warners. And so, and my great-great-grandfather was white on my, one of my great-great-grandparents on my dad's side. So it's an interesting family story. I'll keep rambling if you let me, but
The more you talk, the better.
Great.
The less I talk, the better.
I grew up, by any stretch of the imagination, very humbly, impoverished by today's standards. My folks they split when I was 9. Probably haven't given my dad enough credit. We lost him a couple years ago, but my mom, for the most part, not to sell dad short, raised 5 of us. I was probably 16 when we got running water in our house. I remember that like it was yesterday. But my mom would never let us be dirty, and we were never hungry. And those are 2 things today now. If I go by the house, the first thing she'll always do is to pull up my shirt to see if I've lost any weight. Because that's, when you grow up, right, humbly, your kids being fed is something that's very important to you. And really humble, tough spot. But that's my story. It took me a long time to be willing to tell it in such a way that you're not embarrassed by it or that you're not ashamed by it. But the older that I've gotten, the more I realize how much that part of my journey really defines why I'll roll up my sleeves and get into the trenches for a kid any time of the day or any time of the night, knowing sometimes we don't agree with what should be in the trench. But that's what we do.
So there were 5 of you. Where did you fall in line?
I'm number 4. I'm number 4. So I have 3 older sisters that are about 5 years apart, and then there's a 6-year gap, and then there's me and my brother, Mark.
So what do you remember about summers and growing up around Markham, and what did you do? Did you have a job as a kid later?
I did, man. It was, I had one when I was 12 or 13, and it's interesting because my first, Jackie it's really connected to her family, but I was, the Greens, were farmers, and so Hank was farming, and they would make hay, and I can remember being 7 or 8 years old, being put, on a tractor, and just, saying, "No, here's the clutch, here's the brake," and they'd set the speed, right, and then the guys would be, throwing bales, on the back of the tractor, and so that's, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I can remember that, vividly, swiping apples out of the orchard. I'd walk up and sit on the edge of a tree, but it was poor, but it was fun. You didn't know what you didn't have until you went to somebody else's house, and then you figured out what you didn't have, right? And then you come home and be like, why can't I have that, you know? But the Marshall Carnival was a big thing for us in the summertime because you just didn't have a lot. So it was fun.
So then you started in public schools, Northwestern, as a kindergartner. At Convocation this year, you put up a photo of yourself with your class wearing a
plaid pants and a dark blue shirt.
Yeah. So what happened in your early educational years? What do you recall from that?
Well, I had a wonderful kindergarten teacher in Betty Putnam, who really, and I talk about her a lot. I finally caught up with her. I think she's in memory care now. But my first introduction to school was with her. And I can remember vividly her telling me how special I was, and I'm sure she told everybody that. And I can vividly remember her telling me that I was going to be somebody someday. And when I got the job at Keller Run in 2007, I was sitting in my office and somebody said, "You have a visitor." And so I came out and it was Betty Putnam. And I hadn't seen her since 1974. So this was in 2007, and she showed up with a card. I think she had some flowers. And then she had a picture because she had recently retired and she was cleaning out a bunch of stuff. And she gave me a class picture. And on the back of it, she wrote, "I always knew you would be somebody." And so that was in 2007. And so fast forward 10 years when I get the job as the associate superintendent, this lady shows up again, and it's Mrs. Putnam. This is 2017. And another card, another thing, and you continue to make me proud. I thoroughly enjoyed, and she always said I gave her way too much credit for the impact, but I've got several in here that I would say that about. And then when I got the job, that was kind of the last time I heard from her. But over the years, I would get cards from her with really positive, affirming notes from her, and I probably had one interaction face-to-face with her since 1974, 75. And so she was absolutely, and again, that's not long after you didn't really have a choice in terms of where you went to school, right? So that's 74, 75. So if you think about, the late 60s, there were still lots of things that were going on. But I got introduced to school by someone who, to this day, I talk about Mount Rushmore moments all the time. She is clearly on my Mount Rushmore of people who just have simply influenced my life at a really core foundational time, right, where it can go either way. And then I just had wonderfully positive experiences. Corporal punishment was still in play then, so that helped a little bit. Once in elementary school and twice in junior high, but that I won't tell that story.
Well, we can get into that. So did you like school as a young student?
I loved what school gave me in terms of if I pleased adults, I got positive affirmation. I was not a very good student in the sense of, when you come out of poverty, there's a lot of catch up that you have to do. But school was for me a really safe place, and I had wonderfully positive people that if I did the right thing, there was affirmation. And I liked that. If you asked me to do something, I would do it because I liked that. I wasn't the greatest student, I wasn't the worst student, but I'm proud of the fact that I got exposed to people who set expectations and wouldn't let me compromise that. And I think that's been central to, I think, my ability to be sitting here and having a conversation with you as well.
So you went on to Coleman and then Marshall Junior High in those days. I assume at Marshall Junior High, sports may have come into play a little bit?
It did. It did. It did. In fact, I played soccer when I was really little, but that became a sport that just wasn't affordable for whatever reason, and you're always doing stuff on the weekends. But I started playing basketball and I played football. I played football in Marshall, and I mean this in a positive way because if he's listening, I get a chance to publicly say it now. But the only reason I played football at Marshall was because Jerry Carter threatened to cut me in basketball if I didn't play football. But I had a very low pain threshold. So I played football that one year, But I was a lover of basketball and baseball. Coach Lee is here, so that was my thing. And then I had a guy in my life, some of you may remember the Sherwoods, Mike Sherwood and Kathy Sherwood, but I played with Chris. Doc is really the guy that probably kind of ushered me in and didn't let my circumstances be a barrier. So that's, and I could go for 3 hours about, what he did for me, just in terms of picking me up for practice, if I needed a place to stay, meals, dental work. I mean, you didn't have health insurance in those days, and so, he did my dental work for $1 a visit in the late 70s and early 80s, and he just didn't let my circumstances become a barrier, and consequently, I call it the Route 15 tour, and I'm getting ahead of myself, and I apologize, but Doc took me and his son Chris on a college tour. We were at Fauquier. I called it the Route 15 tour, and we did it in a '67 Mustang. And we hit Mount St. Mary's, Lehigh, Lafayette, Bucknell, Princeton. Those were the places Chris was looking at. But Mount St. Mary's had expressed a little bit of an interest in basketball, but I was looking at Mount St. Mary's in Gettysburg and Dickinson College, on that end. But Chris was Lehigh, Lafayette, Bucknell, Princeton. I'm like, dude, come on, man. But we did all of those schools in a day.
Wow.
In a day. Honest to goodness, we left 5 in the morning, and we hit Mount St. Mary's, and then we hit Gettysburg, and then we hit Dickinson, and then we swung over and hit Lehigh and Lafayette and Bucknell, but all of that in a day. We didn't obviously spend a ton of time at all of those places. But Chris goes to UVA, and I go to Emory and Henry, so we tell you how much of a, but that was, man, I just had people that came in and just said, we're gonna expose you to some things, and that's what athletics did for me, is it gave me an opportunity.
Well, let's talk a little bit about high school, because I went back and read about your senior year with the basketball team. Yeah. That was pretty special.
It was special.
How do you recall that? What about that?
I recall, well, we won 23 games, and I still think that's the most. It's either 1 or 2. But I remember that 4 of the 5 starters on that team were all Marshall Junior High School kids. And it was myself, Kevin Lee, Chris Sherwood, Ed Robertson, and Paul Fry was a Cedar Lee. Yeah. We'll leave him to the side. But 4 of those 5 kids were all Marshall Junior High School kids. And so we kind of came up together. So there was a chemistry that was there. And we're playing Potomac and Woodbridge and Garfield and kids who were 6'10" and, committed to Penn State and UVA and all these places. And we just absolutely wore them out. We went 18-0 in the district that year and absolutely wore them out. And it was fun. It was fun.
A little bit of a chip on your shoulders, though. I mean,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Without question. You
guys won the district tournament.
Yep. No first team all district. I'm not sensitive about
No,
that. No first team all district guys. And we got, clearly it was, in my mind, retaliation, right? I mean, you go 23-2, you beat everybody in the district 18 times, and you have no first team all district folks, but that's okay.
And
it's okay.
So I get the sense that you blossomed some in high school. You received more scholarships than anybody else in your graduating class, according to the list I read. I think there were, I forget how many scholarships, but you received 6 individual scholarships from the community.
Yes.
What else do you recall about high school? Socially, developmentally, as a young person, what were the times like for you in the 80s in high school?
They were wonderful. I had the world's best counselor sitting over there. He'll deflect that. I had Miss Colvin, I had Roger Lee in high school. But for me, it really was a coming of age time of acceptance. Again, you come out of a space where, when you're a kid and you're poor, you don't really know, right? You get the chance to play, you kind of do these things. And we were crowded at Fauquier High School. I mean, it was close to 1,900 kids in grades 10 through 12, so it wasn't an easy thing to navigate. But I had a wonderful support system. I had the opportunity to be involved. I felt accepted. Interestingly enough, it's not until I've gotten older where this notion of differences has really become more complicated. When you're a kid, you don't think like that. And so Fauquier was for me just this wonderful coming of age time that without sports, without wonderfully supportive people, and I know this is cliche, but honest to goodness, I wouldn't have survived because Mom said, you can go to school or not, right? At 18, either you're going, but you're on your own. And that wasn't uncommon, in large families that were in impoverished situations. So I got lucky in that I had the right people in my life at the right time who just wouldn't let me fail. I'm honestly, and he may or may not remember this, I tried to drop geometry probably a dozen times, but they wouldn't let me do it. And because they saw what was needed. I hated math. I still hate math. But people saw that, right? And so we just, I had wonderful people in my life, still do.
By then, you're an adult or practically an adult. You've seen a fair amount by then. How did you think about race in those days and race in this community? Was it an issue?
It was and it wasn't. From a kid perspective, we were friends. Every now and then somebody would get mad and they'd say something stupid. But I remember vividly in 1984, me and Maurice O'Banion and Ed Roberts and Jody Kaysen getting thrown out of the Fort Belvoir restaurant right across from the Livestock Exchange.
That was when I came here.
That was my first real, I mean, you knew you were different growing up, but that was my first real exposure to, man, somebody just genuinely doesn't like me, just because of something. And it was interesting because it was after school that day, and in those days they'd let you stay after school for games and you can go wherever you wanted to and nobody really cared. But we knew Mr. McCoy. I mean, that's who it was. And his daughter, Yvonne, it was interesting, and I'd love to know where she is now. But we'd be on the bus, and she would get really quiet as we got close to the restaurant because they would live behind the restaurant, and she was as social, and then we'd get there, and then she would just. But this particular day, we were staying after school for a game, a baseball game, and we decided we were going to go there. We knew we weren't allowed to go there. I mean, you just kind of knew that. But we decided we were going to go there. And so Ed was the biggest, and he was white, so we put him first in line. Me, Jody, and Maurice all looked like me. And I was the most afraid, so I was in the back. And we kind of got to the door, single file, and Ed steps in and says, "Hey, sir, I'd like to have a pack of Nabs, peanut butter crackers." And we were single file. And he did not see the three of us behind Ed. And Ed, honest to goodness, in 9th grade is as big as I am today. And so he didn't see us. And so Ed took a step forward, and then when he saw us, he absolutely went bananas with language. Get out of here, I told Ed. I mean, it was horrible. So that was my first real exposure to being in a place and having an instance that I really just got treated differently because of that. Beyond that, it's amazing. That's the resiliency of kids, right? We cut that loose and went on. And I think a little while later there was a couple out of D.C. and it was a big deal. But by and large, man, I grew up. Dave Graham is my dear friend to this day, and him and his dad got in a little 2-door yellow Toyota Tercel, and they took me on vacations. They took me places, and so we fished Goose Creek. You grew up without those constraints, but at times, society would put you in a place where you had to come face to face with it. I still do. Still do.
Emory and Henry, how did that happen? You went on the college tour.
Yes.
But that went north.
That went north. But my mom, so actually I was going to end up at Bridgewater, and to this day I don't think the folks there that know me won't speak to me. But it was going to be Bridgewater initially, and then this guy kept calling the house with this really cool Southern drawl, and my mom fell in love with that voice on the telephone. And I wasn't going to go down, and then Doc Sherwood said, no, let's take a visit. Okay, so in the minivan we go this time, right? And we go down, it's me, it's Doc Sherwood, it's Jerry Carter. And so we go down, for the weekend, and I met a couple of guys that were seniors there that year, Eric Scott and Stan Eggleston. And got a chance to play with them. And I met Mike Young, and so just to kind of bring it circle, Mike Young is now the head basketball coach at Virginia Tech. So Mike was the guy that recruited me and was coaching there for a little while until he went on to Radford and then to some other places. And so, but I just fit. I fit, just like it was at Fauquier. The fit mattered. And so I fell in with a bunch of guys who just felt right. And Bob Johnson was the coach there. His dad was the Army Chief of Staff during the Vietnam War. And we did a White House tour one year after my freshman year. And we literally pulled up to the White House, man, and Coach Johnson leaned out and whispered something in the guy's ear, and we went. And I was like, man, this isn't supposed to work this way. And but he was a platoon leader. He was a lieutenant. Did 3 tours of Vietnam. Walked away from 3 helicopter crashes. His dad was the Army Chief of Staff. And so we got the full White House tour that day. And that's when I realized, okay, if you know people, good things can happen. So, but that was a wonderful experience as well.
And basketball again, you guys did incredibly well.
Yeah.
And that continued throughout your 4 years.
It did.
But the first year you made the tournament, and there were some travel complications going to New Jersey, I think I read something about.
Yeah.
But you had 16 on the team, and the NCAA would only pay for 15.
We would only play for 15. And I can't repeat the language that Coach Johnson used. But, that was fun. I got a chance to play and see some of the countryside. But oddly enough, and I don't say this because he's here, I loved baseball probably more than I did basketball. My dad, in those days, the old Negro leagues. I mean, those guys. Baseball was the thing,
right? And
so I was going to grow up and be a baseball player like my dad was. So that actually, I had a greater love for baseball than I did with basketball, and I was decent at baseball. But for whatever reason, basketball became that thing and I actually went to Emory and Henry trying to play. I was going to do both. And this is an interesting story. I mean, the intersection of race and sports in a good way and a bad way kind of comes into play all the time. But I was going to play both there, and Coach Self, who was the baseball coach at the time, says to me, and he always called us youngin', and he said, youngin', he said, Bob brought you here to play basketball. He said, I really don't think it's a good idea for you to play baseball. And he said, I think you should really just focus on basketball. And so, and that's what I did. And after I had finished, I asked him at one point in time, I said, Coach Self, why is it that time you told me that I should really? He said, because at the time, I would have been the only person of color on the baseball team. And at that time, they were going places in the late 80s that, it would have been difficult for me, as a baseball player. And he really did me a solid by not allowing me to play baseball. In fact, we had a couple of basketball instances where we played our games at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because we couldn't stay. And that's deep Southwest Virginia. Right. But Coach said they're just places I couldn't keep you guys, after the sun went down. And so, that's, and that's kind of how you would just, try to do that. But that's, honest to goodness, the reason I did not play baseball. Coach would not let me play for my own well-being.
Wow. So you majored in business and economics. What were you thinking about a career at that point?
I was going to do business. I really didn't have an idea. So I did economics and business. I majored in management, did a minor in geography, and don't ask me why. I don't know. Dr. Morgan was my geography professor. I had him for 8 classes for geography. But we had a 9-hole course on campus. And so that's my introduction to golf. And Dr. Morgan either had his classes at 8 o'clock in the morning or at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so if it was an afternoon class, you know, he would get out and look over the hill and he would see me walking up the first fairway. And he'd yell down, "Are you coming to class today?" And I'd say, "No, sir, not today." But he would catch me and he'd say, "Mage," he said, "you know, if you came to my class more often, you'd make more than a C." And I said, "Dr. Morgan, if I get 8 C's in your class, I'm going to be okay." and I got 8 C's in geography. So I minored in geography. Yeah.
So you had a great basketball career.
Yep.
You're in the Hall of Fame down there, but you stayed at the school for 2 years as
Yes.
an admission counselor,
Yep.
and that apparently started...
That's what changed my professional trajectory. I had a math professor, calculus professor. Took me a little bit of time to get through that. Ended up in summer school, and in that summer I got hooked in with the registrar and a couple folks, and they just kind of really said, you know, what are you thinking about upon graduation? So I got offered the job in admissions, and then I was in high schools all over the place. And the state of Virginia was my area, and that was 91 to 93. So I was doing the college tour. We recruit kids, you know, for things like that. And that's really was my exposure to high school counseling. That's where I got into, hey, there may be something here for me. And so I did that for 2 years, applied to a bunch of graduate schools, got accepted to Tennessee Tech. And
So you spent 2 years down
2
there.
years in the admissions office. And I recruited kids out of, at that time, Fauquier Liberty was in the process of being built. And so that's really what turned me on to counseling. And again, I had some wonderful experiences with my own counselor. So, and I thought there was a career there for me. And so I went back to graduate school, and I did a master's in educational psychology and school counseling. I did that in like 18 months. And then I was home. Actually, I was sitting in my apartment one day, and the phone rings, and he may remember this, but Roger Lee calls me. It was sometime that summer. And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm in graduate school." He said, "Hey, listen, you know, Liberty's opening. You know, when can you be done?" And I said, "Well, I'm supposed to finish in December, but I think I could probably hustle it up and get finished a little bit sooner." And so I finished up my master's in November, did my master's thesis, did all that, got it all taken care of. And I didn't participate in graduation. So I got everything signed off on, and I came up and I coached girls basketball starting in November, and I was a substitute that year. And so I coached girls basketball, helped Paul coach boys basketball, and we coached baseball. And so that's how I got back into the area. These guys called me, man, because I actually got a job offer from Knox County Schools. Jackie, wave Jackie, I see you back there. But Jackie gave me, and I still have that contract, but Jackie took me around Knoxville one day and got me introduced to some folks. And in graduate school, I was offered a job in Knox County. And this was before the call from Liberty came. And that job offer was $27,000. I still have the contract in a box. And I had accepted it verbally, and then that call came, and then so I kind of pulled out of that, and then I came home, and been here since.
And then you do some assistance. You do 4 years at Liberty, is that right?
So I worked at Liberty for a year. I won't get into the complicated story of how I ended up in Loudoun, but I did 95, 96 as a counselor. No, I did that at Loudoun County for a year, and then the call came again from Liberty High School saying, "Hey, we got a counseling open down here." So I worked at Liberty from 96 to 2000.
Okay. So then you get into administration in Loudoun. Prince William. Kettle Run is opening.
Yep.
How did that happen?
I was assistant principal at Battlefield High School. Somebody called me, and about a year before Kettle Run was scheduled to open, and said, "Hey, there's a high school opening over here. Are you interested?" I was like, "Sure." And so I just kind of sat on it, applied for it, went through the process, got hired in 2007 as the principal there, and I was there from 2007 to 2017.
And that's when David Jeck came to the community, I believe.
He came in 2013.
13, so he was
Yes,
here.
He was
here.
So I was
Okay.
here
Okay.
when he came.
All right, and at some point, he offers you a job in administration.
Yes.
Why did you want to take that, leaving a school building?
I wasn't. I was going to be a principal for the rest of my life, honestly. In fact, when Sandra retired, she came to see me and said, "Hey, is this something you might be interested in?" I said, "Heck no." I said, I'm a principal through and through, right? And then it was actually my wife, Lisa, said to me one day, why wouldn't you give that some consideration? You've worked hard all your life. Trey's going to be graduating, moving on. And so she was actually the one that pushed me to reconsider it. And so then I put in for it and go through the process. And so I got hired there. So my last act at Kettle Runner was to hand my son his high school diploma.
I was there.
Which to this day is one of my proudest moments. And then I got a chance to start a new chapter. And I did that for 6 years. Had no interest in being a superintendent.
So, okay.
And I'm on record saying that. I love the job, but at the time I had no interest in being a superintendent.
So the obvious question, how and why did that happen then?
I really, up until about 2 years ago, I loved the job. I loved leadership. And so about 2 years ago, Dave Jett came to me and said, "Hey, I'm gonna," actually, I take that back, it was a little bit longer than that because that's how I ended up back in school. But about 4 years ago, he came to me and said, "Hey, I think you can be a superintendent." And I said, I don't know about that. I said, "I love the job that I'm doing now." He said, "No, I really think you need to give this some consideration." And so that's when I made the decision to go back to school. And I said, well, at least on paper, have what I needed to. But up about 2 years ago is where I think the conversation really intensified between he and I, because he had shared that he was going to be getting out of it soon. And we survived, we think we survived COVID in schools. So that's kind of where it really ramped up about 2 years ago. And then I just tried to position myself in such a way that I could be seen in a light from a leadership perspective, that in a very positive light. Somebody's mad at you all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. But I just tried to position myself in such a way that if and when that time came, you could be seen. And I say to people all the time, you're always interviewing, right? And so the day you take a new job, you're interviewing. And so it's a daily thing. So that's where it intensified, was about 2 years ago.
And then the offer's made and no hesitation?
None. And for the record, I did go through an interview process. It was painful. But yeah, I went through it, and the offer was made. No hesitancy whatsoever. And I think when you serve a community, the way we've been privileged to be able to serve a community, there really wasn't any hesitation from my perspective. I have confidence in my ability to do the job. All of the bits that come with it, but no hesitancy, whatsoever.
And the average tenure of a superintendent in the United States is what, about 6 years, I read?
And shrinking.
And shrinking, yeah.
Yeah. One day at a time. I managed to survive. 22 of my 29 years have been in leadership. So most of my public school career has either been running a building or running a division.
And what have you learned about leadership, and what do you tell people whom you mentor?
You've got to be willing to lose to win. I always say that to folks all the time. In leadership, sometimes you have to take 2 steps back in order to move 3 steps forward. You've got to have thick skin. I deal in a world where most of my time is spent with folks who are mad about something. And so, and I'm thankful that most of our folks are happy about something. At least I think they are. But you have to be willing to lose to win. If you go into a room thinking that you know everything, and you don't allow the room to shape the conversation, you're setting yourself up for failure. So that's what I mean by that. You've got to be able to gather a lot of information very quickly. You have to be willing to be that person to go against the room if that's what's needed. But I tell anybody new coming into this business now, if you're doing it to be popular, don't do it. If you're doing it for the money, don't do it. If you do not have thick skin, you will not last long. And so it's tough, but you have to be, that's why I say a little bit crazy, because you have to live in a world where there's just constant movement, good and bad. And it comes in very quickly.
Yeah, it's the largest enterprise in
It
this
is.
county. You've got 1,900 employees, 20 schools, I guess, now.
19 now.
19 now?
Yep.
Well, also, $160 million budget. Everybody wants a piece of you every day, it
Yes.
seems. So
Yes.
can you walk us just quickly through a typical week? And I know there's no such thing. How do you work? How do you go about this new job?
I make sure I spend most of my time with board members, and they're the best board in the world if they're listening. They really are. I spend most of my space on a daily basis in a political realm. My job is to keep politics out of schools, but the reality is it's impossible. We were talking about this beforehand. You know, I'm a believer in common space. We can find common ground, but people won't let you stay there sometimes. So you spend a lot of time just saying, let's move to the center and figure this thing out. But I spend most of my day in meetings. In a community perspective, I spend a lot of time with board members. I spend a lot of time with principals in one way, shape, or form, because the phone rings constantly with scenarios. You know, this has happened, that's happened. And right now, communication is key. So I never want to be behind the 8 ball with communication. So we're always planning for what communication should look like, because our communities come to want information very quickly, but you've got to give them accurate information very quickly. So we spend a lot of time talking. My cabinet meetings are Tuesdays. They're probably 5 or 6 hours.
Wow.
Because you're processing all of the upcoming stuff. You're dealing with last week's stuff. And questions are coming in constantly. We get FOIA'd 3 or 4 times a week. So you spend a lot of time in this space of information.
All of us have opinions about public education because most of us went through it. Right. If you had 10 minutes to address the entire county at once through Zoom or some other magic, what would you tell them? Are there misconceptions that you would like to address with the broader community?
Yeah, there are. I would first and foremost say we're not in the business of indoctrinating kids. Public education is the greatest institution on the face of the planet. Most of us in this room, if not all of us, but most of us, went through the institution. We've got great teachers. I would say, you know, don't let an experience that we've had a few years ago completely change, you know, the good that comes with sending your children to public schools. I don't know of a single, let me back up. I genuinely believe that people walk into our building every day wanting to do right by students. And if you don't believe that as a leader, and you don't foster that, and you don't do everything that you can to, so I would say to people, you know, just stay the course, you know, have faith that we have an interest in doing right by kids. That's what we're charged to do. That's a great responsibility. So I'd say let's pump the brakes a little bit.
So how does being a parent, and how did raising your son through public education affect your performance as an educator?
Everything. In fact, he avoided me in school. He would, and Carol would tell you, he would come down the hallway, he'd see me, and he'd turn and go down a different hallway. But it deepened my level of empathy for what other parents go through. My son had a disability in school. He struggles with anxiety, and he doesn't mind me sharing his story because, you know, there are a lot of kids that wrestle with things. And so wrestling with that in my own home, you know, allowed me to really, I think, empathize on a greater scale with kids who were coming into our building who were struggling and trying to figure out, you know, how do we serve them in a capacity that meets their needs.
Let's just run through, and we're eating a lot of time. We could go on.
I'm probably doing a lot of talking.
No, you're great. Like I said, the less I talk, the better. Let's just talk about a couple of issues: learning loss, mental health. How are you guys doing? What's happening with students today?
So we're investing a lot of time. If you're following the All in Virginia plan, there's a new round of expectations that are coming out of Richmond. The latest one is called All in Virginia. 70% of the money that's coming in now will have to go to learning loss. 20% goes to chronic absenteeism. No, the reverse. 20% goes to literacy and 10% goes to chronic absenteeism. And so for me, I've invested heavily in doing some extended day learning opportunities for kids in our elementary schools. With our grant money, we try to do some things on Tuesdays, Thursdays for kids. But really, we brought back summer learning in a really robust way. Summer school went away with the recession in 2008. We did some online stuff for a while, but the last 3 summers, we've had between 300 and 400 kids coming into our buildings, really just focused on literacy. The bubble that I have kind of focused on right now, these kids would be 4th and 5th graders now. And so, so that's kind of where we're putting our focus right now. We're doing a lot. Really, there's a lot of information about the science of reading now, and just trying to make sure that all of our teachers are teachers of reading. So it's just not coming from one particular place. So we know a lot more about kids today and how they learn, and we're accepting that, I think, more today than we ever have before. And so that's kind of where we are now.
Technology. I remember sitting in the school board meeting 9-10 years ago when the board, after agonizing, agreed to let students bring mobile devices to school. And not a parent, but I thought, oh my God, where are we? And
well, that pendulum has swung in the other direction now, because all I get now is, can you ban phones from schools?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're getting a lot of now. That's a tough space. The truth of the matter is, it's all about expectations. I'm not a proponent of banning cell phones in schools. I think from a safety perspective, I think as adults, as educators, we have a responsibility to set clear expectations for kids. And I think when we do that, kids meet those expectations. So, but there's a lot of energy around cell phones, the internet, cyberbullying, things like that we have to wrestle with now.
I'm wrestling with my attention span.
Yeah.
And I think screen time has affected it.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. But COVID ushered in thousands of Chromebooks. We're now mostly one-to-one, grades 3 through 12, I believe. But we have to have a conversation about, what's the replacement cycle going to be for 8,000 Chromebooks, right?
Some stories I've read recently about that big issue.
So we're going to have some tough budget challenges, I think, coming up relative to, whether we stay one-to-one. But I think a lot of our staff would say we've lost some authenticity around teaching and learning, because of the device. How do we get that, to be more the focal point? So.
Middle schools, communities investing a lot. Cedar Lee opened, renovated. How's that, and what can we expect going forward with Taylor?
Cedar Lee's in good shape. We're going through some normal conditioning stuff, so anytime you build something new, it takes a year to kind of sort out all the bugs, but it's functioning. Really beautiful space. Taylor is still good. It's on paper, it's $79 million to renovate Taylor. We've got all the kids moved into the new Taylor. And then we're still in the A&E phase, the architecture and engineering phase. And that's about 65% done. All goes well, we should be in the bid process in February, March for Taylor. And if all goes well, there should be a shovel going in the ground late spring next summer.
So that's a 1.5 to 2 year project?
It's an 18-month construction project, so I think we're scheduled, if all goes well, and nothing gets pulled, and I'm not hearing anything about that. 26, 27 at the earliest is when kids would move back into that building.
Teaching staff shortages, what's happening these days? Your predecessor, Dave Jack, famously said, why would anybody want to do this, right?
Yeah, but and he were sitting here, I'd say that I think everybody would want to do this. We've had a great year hiring. We have about 30 vacancies, but I would say pre-COVID, we would go into any school year with about 25 or 30 vacancies. But special education, math, chemistry, physics, school counselors, believe it or not, we have several openings there. Those are really, 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 really tough to fill. And so, you farm out those services, it's tough, but special education and math, it's a bear. That's probably most of the 30 or so openings that we have right now.
You don't like math, yet you're now responsible, and you've got lots of support for drafting the budget, which I assume is about to begin.
It is. It's already begun. It began in July, so we're in the early phases. I meet with the county administrator every other week. We do joint budget discussions, so I can't predict how it's going to be. One of my goals was to change the narrative around the energy with budget. We have to get the hostility out of the conversation. I'm a believer that there's enough there to support schools, to support fire and rescue, to support the sheriff's office, but you got to get into the room and roll up your sleeves and be reasonable about what that looks like. I believe we have most of what we need to serve our kids. The reality is we have vacancies because nobody's going into public education. But we've done some really good stuff with teacher salaries, so we had a good hiring year, right? Everybody's just stealing everybody else's, teachers. But the pipeline really is dry. But I will predict that I think we'll have a good budget discussion. I think we're going to have a good budget year because I think the players have doubled down and said, we have to commit. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
For lack of a better term, we talked about politics, culture wars, whatever you want to call them. The temperature seems to have come down a little bit, but how do you assess where we are as a community in terms of talking to one another about what have become very difficult issues?
I think we have a long way to go. The library book piece on the surface has calmed, but it's still very intense behind the scenes, even though I think we've done some good work to try to find some sort of common ground there. But if we can't get to a place where we can talk about things that matter to children, and right now, adults are talking a lot about differences, and we shouldn't be talking about differences, but the reality is that's central to the conversation because I couldn't have gelled with a bunch of guys if a bunch of adults didn't force us into the same space and wouldn't compromise certain things. I do think the temperature is less because I think we're changing the narrative. But schools are wonderfully diverse places. That is not a bad thing. And in my estimation, it's not a bad thing to talk about it, in particular when it becomes an issue. And the truth of the matter is we have issues in our schools sometimes. Kids don't get along. And sometimes they don't get along because of our language. Sometimes they don't get along because an adult in their life has said you shouldn't be friends with a certain person. And our teachers are on the front lines of having to tackle those issues. And if we don't make sure that they're comfortable tackling those issues, it's part of the equation. It's just part of the equation. So.
How do you cope with the stress of this responsibility, personally?
It's tough. I work hard. I'm there early, I'm there late. I really do, when I'm away from it, I try to be away from it. Even though, I was 6 hours away this weekend, and, I was on the phone quite a bit Saturday and Sunday because of some community stuff that you all may be following. But you have to make a conscious effort to turn off the switch. I tell all new leaders, leave it, it'll be there tomorrow when you get there. But you really have to make a conscious effort to not think about it, even though I recognize in my job that's not a reality. I've got a wonderfully supportive spouse. Lisa understands. We're empty nesters, so that helps a little bit. And truth is, she probably is happy, after 29 years that I leave the house a little bit. But you have to be. Does that happen to you too?
A lot.
Okay, good. But you have to be balanced. You have to be balanced, and I'm very intentional when it comes to seeking balance.
I apologize because we've run longer than allotted, and I could do this for another hour and a half. I don't know about Major, but would anybody like
here as long as y'all
to
want
ask a question while we still have a little bit of time? We have a mic, so we'd like to get you on the audio. Sorry.
Plus, we like to see you.
Yeah.
You probably can hear me if I just shout.
Well,
This is I don't want this to turn into a political
It's okay.
conversation. But the governor of Virginia, almost immediately upon being elected, opened what we all think of as a tip line.
Yes.
Okay. My question is very limited and specific. Would you know, as superintendent of the schools, if someone had complained about one of your teachers?
So the answer to that is I get it even outside of the tip line, so I would conclude that anything that would go into a tip line would likely make its way to my desk. We have a community that isn't afraid to share. That's okay.
I'm simply asking, does the governor's office let you or the teacher know that someone's complained about?
I've not received anything.
That answers my
Yeah, I've not received anything.
good question.
Maybe an unmonitored line.
That's okay, but I can answer that one honestly, yes.
Good question.
Yep.
Next up, anybody? Please.
And I have no time limit, so
Nor do
it's
I,
up to
but,
you guys.
you know,
So,
I'm not in charge, thankfully.
This is not a question, it's a comment. The late Dudley Payne, judge, many of you might have known him, was on the selection committee for the principal of Kettle Run. And I was working closely with him at the time with the Chamber of Commerce, and he came back and he said, Major Warner walked in, and he was oozing charisma and compassion and courage and competence, and the whole thing was over. And I wish that he were around to see this day because
thank
he
you.
was so right.
Thank you. There were 18 people in that room that day. I'm not sure how I oozed anything of confidence, but I remember that vividly. I was like, whoa.
I'm a foreigner. I'm from North Carolina.
That's all right.
And I'm from assisted living. I appreciate what you're doing, and I wanted to know if maybe with your ideas about leadership, are you interested in going into Congress? I think they need someone.
No. My job is to try to depoliticize public education. And I'm not, is depoliticize a legitimate word?
I think it
Okay,
is,
good.
yes.
Okay, because I use it a lot.
I believe it is correct.
And I'm trying to get it out. So.
Okay, I wondered too about your attitude toward volunteers coming in to help out. How would one go about doing that?
So you can, there's a ton of ways. I always tell people if there's a specific school that you're interested in. I know coming out of COVID, we're still wrestling with that space, but our schools are open. We're encouraging volunteerism. So if you live in a particular community that has an elementary, middle school, I would just reach out and let them know what you're interested in doing.
Thank you.
And you're good. Yep, we'd love to have you. So,
It's not a question, it's a comment.
thank you, Ms. Bagley.
You know, you hired me at Kettle Run.
I did.
I worked with you for 9 years. I thank you as your employee. I thank you as the principal for my son, who without this man, he would not have graduated. And now he's in grad school. And I owe it to him.
Thank you.
He was my protector, because trust me, as an attendance person, I did get all, people wanted to beat me up, and he would have to get on the phone with him. But I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
For who you are and your service. And if you needed somebody tomorrow, I would come
I
out
know
of
you
retirement
would.
for you.
I know you would. Thank you.
Anybody else? You're a young man. How long are you going to do this?
Well, I signed a 4-year contract. I'm excited about that. I will do everything I can to sign another 4-year contract. I know I'm crazy enough to love what we're doing. And it's hard. Like we talked before, it's, I live in a space where I deal a lot with folks who are struggling, and it's the losses, that stick with you. You never want to lose a kid. You never want to lose an employee. What's happened at Fauquier is a tough way to start the school year. But I've always, and I learned this from a lot of wonderful people, make a space for yourself. I love public education because it's given me the confidence that I need to go back to school more than once. I'm proud of being a scholar in my profession, you know, and it took me a while to get used to the fact that, you know, I know something about leadership, even though there will be people who tell you I don't know a thing about leadership, and that's okay. But we get the privilege of serving 10,000 plus kids and all the good stuff and bad stuff that comes with that. And I'll defend it because it's the single biggest thing we can do for kids, and that's to provide a quality education. I'm living testament that if you put good people in a child's life, right, and they encourage them and support them and set expectations, that anything can happen. Anything can happen.
That would be a great place to end, but I've had this question rolling around in my head, and I think about it all the time, recognizing that education is a completely individual thing that we try to run through an assembly line. No offense.
That's okay.
Do you think about your experience and how much different, I'm sure you do, it is for kids today, and what are the most important differences, if any? Maybe kids are kids.
Well, I think technology, I think the world's faster. Information is more readily available. I would argue that kids today are no different than the kids, you know, when we were that age. There's just a lot more opportunity, which is a wonderful thing. There are just more opportunities for kids. But what comes with that sometimes isn't necessarily a healthy thing. We talk about screen time, things like that. But our schools still give kids the opportunity to be exposed to great teachers, to be exposed to wonderful curriculum, to be exposed through extracurricular activities, sports, theater, music, all of those things. And so as long as we can continue to put resources into the opportunities for kids, then, you know, at the end of the day, the screen time is what it is. But if you watch homecoming, like if you go to a homecoming dance or you go to a homecoming football game or any Friday night, you'll see that what kids still value is something beyond technology. They value the interactions, which is why, you know, that experience of COVID became such a tough thing, because what we know about kids is that when they're in the space with each other, and right, they feel safe and they get to participate and get to do all these things. And so that's what we have to fight and scratch and claw for, is to make sure that no matter how many devices you give a kid, schools are still a place where the interaction has to be central to their successes going forward. That's where the interpersonal skills get developed. They argue. That's where you learn how to, you know, resolve conflict and things. So that's why, you know, I'm not a big proponent of virtual learning. I recognize that not all of our kids learn through a face-to-face model. And so we've had to diversify that. We know a lot more about kids today than we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. But schools are still built on, if I can do this with an adult, or I can do this with a peer in a very positive way, there's where the foundation comes in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. You've still got time to play 18 today, I think.
Yes.
Just want to mention a couple of things. Thanks to Maria Del Rosso and the library staff for doing this, Bob Rankin for recording it. It will be available on YouTube, on the library's YouTube channel. We're trying to develop a series, so please let us know of people with whom we should have conversations, and that's the goal, just have a conversation. We have Sir Peter Crane, who runs the Oak Spring Garden Foundation, Bunny Mellon's Gardens near Upperville in April. Went there for the first time a couple weeks ago. Spectacular. Think and hope that'll be great. We haven't nailed down somebody for February. We have some candidates, so we're open to suggestions. Please help us kind of grow this thing if we can.
I have some homework for you. These are evaluation forms. In particular, we'd like to know how you learned about this program, and it gives you the opportunity to make suggestions as well. I'm going to ask Rosemary to pass on that side, please. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Dr.
Absolutely.
Warner. It's so inspiring, encouraging. Thank you for being our leader, and
Thank
we
you.
look for great things from the schools.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.